Hello, and welcome to Collie Conversations, the podcast that's all about transforming your life with your Border Collie. I'm Gemma Fisher, your expert in all things collie. Whether you're dealing with reactivity, recall struggles, or just looking to understand your collie better, you've come to the right place. I'm here to help you turn those frustrating behaviours into wins with practical advice and real life solutions. If you haven't already, head over to our Facebook group to get your collie questions answered in my weekly live Q&A session. Plus, the group also has training guides, my recommended resources from the podcast, and lots of other extra support and tips for collie owners just like you. Today, we're going to be discussing one of the most valuable cues we teach our collies, the Holy Grail, which is a reliable recall, whatever the distraction. So grab a cup of tea and get ready to take some notes. Let's get started. So first and foremost, when I start working with a new student and they say to me, Gemma, my dog doesn't come back when I call. What I want to know from them is, what is the criteria for your recall? So in simple terms, what is the picture? Paint me a picture of what the completed recall looks like. And for me and my dogs, the recall is complete when they've come close enough that I'm able to touch their collar. All right. So that means that either I can pop you on the lead, or, I can ask you to come in and sit next to me, or, whatever that might be. That's when it's complete. Now, one of the other things to consider when we start thinking about our recall is, what cue are you going to use? Are you going to use a verbal cue? So my verbal cue is come here, said in that very specific tone, and it sounds like a little cue. But other people, some of my students use a whistle. It might be that you use some sort of physical cue. So it's a big, wide, open gesture with your arms. Not so helpful, potentially. That physical gesture isn't so helpful if your dog isn't looking at you. So it may be that we do need some sort of a verbal and whistle, either one or the other, to be able to support that physical cue. And one of the things that I want to know from you is, how does your dog know that they can go off again? So once they've come in and they've done their job, how do they know that they can go off again? And for me and my dogs, that's what I call a release cue. And that's essentially their permission for freedom, their ability to just go off, run, enjoy, do whatever they like. And those permissions might look different. It might be, if we're in an area where I know that they particularly like to do some sniffing, it'll be, okay, go sniff. It might be that they want to go and say hello to a person or another dog. Okay, go say hi. It'll be some sort of permission that allows them to go and have that freedom. Now, when we start thinking about recall training, one of the things I want to know about that particular dog, that particular individual, is, what is their drug of choice? All right. So a drug of choice will look different from person to person, as it will from dog to dog. Now, food might be on the list, and food may only be on the list when you're at home. It may be that they're not so interested in taking food when you're out and about. But food is quite a wide, area of reinforcement. We can have very dry kibble biscuits on the one end of the spectrum, all the way through to my freshly baked liver cake recipe, which has just come out the oven, which has an enormous value to my dogs and to lots of the dogs that I teach. So thinking about the food that we use in terms of our reward as having different values can be really helpful, because sometimes our dogs will do an amazing job and therefore they should be paid an amazing, reward for doing so. But other times, if it's something that they know well and it's in a low distraction environment and we just want to say, yep, good job, it doesn't necessarily have to be the highest reward. And even then, sometimes I'll mix it up. Sometimes my dogs will do something that they consider to be part of our normal everyday, but then mum comes out with this odd bit of hot dog sausage she's found in her pocket that she'd forgotten she had. And that will be something that then can come out as a surprise, delicious reward. Now, toys are often cited as a Border Collie's drug of choice. And again, toys, there's a huge spectrum of the different toys and things that we can do with toys. But one of the things that I always want to check in with people is, are you using your toy as a reward? So does the toy appear when the dog comes all the way back and has completed that the criteria of the recall, which is to come and get close enough that I can take your collar? Or are you waving it around your head, trying to catch your dog's attention? And are you essentially using it as a bit of a lure? Are you trying to say, hi, I've got this amazing toy. Please stop chasing, that cyclist. Please stop chasing that squirrel. Come on back. We want to be careful if we're using toys like that, because toys used like that as a lure are not actually reinforcing what we think we're reinforcing. So that's important information for us as a trainer. But it also means that the dog potentially has the ability to go, do I want to keep chasing that squirrel, or do I want to go and see that toy? And it becomes like a set of weighing scales. And I don't really want my dogs to do a set of weighing scales. I want them to, when they hear their recall cue, go, do you know what? Mum has asked me to do this. That comes above all else. And an amazing reward might be in it for me, or it might not. But that's not the point. It's about coming and doing the thing that mum asked. Now, that leads me into a nice way of thinking about other drugs of choices in terms of activities. And this is where my dogs very much live a permission-based lifestyle. So it isn't that everything in their life is for free. It's not that they don't get lots of treats and they're not spoiled rotten in lots of ways. But when it comes to day-to-day things that they maybe want to come out the back of my van in order to go for their dog walk, if they want to go off the lead, there are little things that they have to do to earn permission to be able to do those things. And I don't do that to be unkind or make my dog's life difficult. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make them understand at every little point that I can that doing the thing that I ask is important. It earns them reinforcement. I am a useful person in their life. But this is how I keep them safe. This is how I keep them safe, because they understand that listening to mum is a big priority when it comes to being out and about in the world. And it means that they have a bigger life as a result. Now, one of the things that I'll often do when I start working with a new student is I'll talk about something called back chaining. And back chaining is essentially looking at the behavior that we're looking at as a chain of different little pieces, breaking it down into smaller pieces. And what we do is we start with the end piece. So instead of working at the very beginning, so taking them to the busiest walking spot we can find and trying to get them to come from one side of the field all the way over to us on the other side of the field, which would be like the the full chain. We start with the end. So we work back to the beginning. Now, the recall end, as I've talked about already, is taking the dog's collar. So that's one of the first exercises that I encourage people to get started. And in my Fixated to Focus 5-day recall challenge, that's exactly one of the exercises that we do. So it's as simple as every time you call your dog in from the garden, as they come through the door, taking their collar and feeding them anywhere between 3 and 10 treats. And not all at once. It would be 1, 2, 3. And then if, I was going to do more than that, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be breaking up, one treat into lots of little treats so that the reinforcement is increased. Okay. What we don't want is to give 5 treats all in one go, because from our dog's perspective, that counts as one reward. So what we're aiming to do is explain to them from a collie maths point of view that this behavior is important. It's worth doing because it's heavily reinforced. Now, the recall chain. So we just talked about the end piece of the chain, but it starts with the dog being able to give us what we call name response. So they give me their attention and they check in to see what I want. Now, my dog's name doesn't automatically mean come back to me, but it definitely means give me your attention, because it might be that I've seen a cyclist coming up the path. I might be about to ask them to lie down. It might be that I've seen a person or a dog looking a little bit worried, and so I might look to call them into me. Doesn't matter. Name response means give me your attention, find out what I want. Now, if I want them to come back to me and I want them to complete the recall, then I'm going to use my recall cue, which, as I've said, is come here. That's my full recall cue. Now, what they should do here is they should then move towards me. And when I start doing this with my young dogs when they come home, is we just do short distances to start with. So it's super easy for the dog to be correct, because I'm not asking them for great big long distances. And then we'll gradually increase those as we go. And then, as I've said, the third piece will be I'm going to take your collar to complete the recall chain. And that happens every single time. And I do that automatically without thinking. And that's one of the things which is so valuable when it comes to young teenage dogs. Are very good at playing keep away. So they'll kind of come sort of close, but not close enough for you to be able to take their collar and pop them on the lead. That one little task, if you do that several times a day as you're calling them in from the garden, that will make a really big difference to your training. Now, I'd like you to think about your recall cue as a test. All right. So every time we call our dog, we're asking a question. All right. And what we're saying is, do you understand to come back straight away? All right, regardless of what distractions might be in the environment, regardless of what you were in the middle of doing, do you understand that that recall means that you have to come back straight away? Now, initially, the correct answer should always be really easy for the dog to give. So we should only ask that question when we are, I guess, 99.9% sure that they're going to give the correct answer. Because what we want to make sure is that they have a history of giving the correct answer to that question, rather than, it's a 50-50 thing as to whether or not they'll do it or not. The incorrect answer should be difficult, not impossible, but difficult, so that the dog actually can see, okay, so yeah, that looks like the path I should go down when I hear that question of that recall cue. Now, when it comes to stopping the dog getting or making the wrong decision, what I want to do is I want to control access to the thing that might distract them. All right. So what we start with in one of the games that I play in the Collie Culture Club is we set up our dogs with maybe a friend holding them, or I ask them to do a sit wait, and then I look to recall them past an empty bowl. Okay. And that empty bowl, I do a big Oscar-winning performance of making a fuss of having put food in that bowl, and then I look to call them back. Now, normally you can tell when the dog sets off from either that person that's holding them or from that sit that they're doing that position of. You can normally tell whether or not they're going to come straight back to you, or their focus is with the bowl and they're going to go with the bowl. All right. So if it looks like they're going to go towards the bowl, then what you're going to look to do is get to the bowl before them. You're going to cover that bowl of food. If you're using a toy, you're going to remove the toy. You're going to stop the activity. You're going to control access to the wrong answer, so that you can explain to them that the correct answer is, even if there is freshly baked liver cake in that bowl, even if your favorite tennis ball is just over there, even if a friend is kicking a football back and forth between their feet, even if all of those things are happening, you need to come to me. And there should be a choice point in our training. If it's too easy, there's no learning taking place. So if that bowl remains empty, if you're working with a dog that doesn't like food anyway, it's not a difficult exercise. So it needs to be at a point where the dog is interested in whatever the distraction is. Otherwise, as I say, there's no light bulb moments taking place, which is what we're after. So it's about getting that balance of something that's a little bit tricky, but not impossible, right? Something that's just sort of right there in the middle. Now, one of the things I would also encourage you to think about is, what do you actually mean when you are calling the dog? Okay. So recall cues are often overused, and they're used in the wrong context too. So sometimes, for example, I've seen people use their recall cue when they're out in the woods and there's two tracks and their dog has shot off down this track, and they call their dog, they use their recall cue to go down the track that they're actually turning left instead of where the dog has gone and turning right. So actually, they didn't need their recall cue. It didn't require the dog to come all the way in and come close enough for their collar to be taken. And unfortunately, often humans will use their recall cue when actually they don't then follow through on it. They're not actually requesting the dog to come all the way close enough to take their collar. They're just changing direction, and they just want their dog to follow. So one of the skills that I teach my handlers and my students is teaching a this way cue. Now, this way is a change of direction cue. Essentially, it's a like check in with me, find out the new direction, and then off we go. So what I would have you do is set up 2 cones or flower pots, posts, something, whatever you've got in your garden that's handy, about 5 paces apart if you can, just so that you're in a kind of a straight line. And then as you reach point B, you're going to cue this way in a nice cuey type voice. And you're going to encourage your dog to do a 360 turn with you to come around the cone and then start heading back in the opposite direction. Now, as you finish the turn, you're going to present your dog with something absolutely delicious, like some really nice rewards. And again, rather than just 1 reward, you might use 3, you might use 10, you're going to mix up the number of times, the number of rewards you're offering. And you're going to build it to the point where you don't need to encourage your dog to turn with you, because they hear the cue and they go, I know that one. And they look to come and turn with you. And they're excited about turning because they know what's coming next, which is this delicious reward. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is, like I've said before, my dogs name doesn't necessarily mean that they have to come all the way to me. And one of the things that I do encourage people to think about is, if you are in a situation where you are not very sure that your dog is paying enough attention to be able to do their recall cue, I don't want you to use your recall cue and be completely ignored. I don't want you to become background chatter to your dog. So one of the things that all of my dogs have, I'm going to use Summer as an example, but all of my dogs have multiple names. Now, the only name that Summer has to actually respond to and really pay attention to is Summer. All right, that's her, like, mum needs my attention. All right. She has so many different names. She has Summy, Summy Bum, Sum, Summer Lane, Summer Bean, Miss Sum, Littlest One, Missy, and probably half a dozen others that I can't even think of. But when I'm out and about, I'm talking to her, and she knows that I'm talking to her, but it's not an official, like, I need your attention cue. It's more of a coochie type thing. But it's really, really helpful if we're in a situation where I see her attention is maybe, focused on something else. If I do something like Mummy, I can just see whether or not I get an ear back. I can see whether or not she can turn her head. But if she can't, she hasn't ignored me issuing her an instruction. What she's done is she's just shown me that she's completely focused on that. And so I'm going to have to proceed differently. All right. Now, as I've talked about, my dogs live a permission-based lifestyle, and that's really what I encourage all of my students to do with their dogs. So what I want to understand really is, how does your dog behave when they're faced with something they want? Are they just immediately thinking, I'm just going to go for it, I'm going to take it, I'm going to have it? Or do they look to check in with you before they go for it? How much free access do they have to things that they enjoy? Do they feel like I remember going to a home visit once, and there was a sign up as I walked into the house, and it said, "The dog and his housekeeping staff live here." Is that how your dog feels about their life? Now, if they do, it's really nice to hear that they feel, well looked after. That's positive. But it might be that they don't feel like they necessarily have to listen to you, because you're just the housekeeping staff. You're just the one that keeps their water bowl topped up, their food bowl topped up, their entertainment system, etc., etc. What we're looking for is that they are looking to us for permission, rather than rushing off without a backward glance, which is often what happens, particularly when it comes to letting them off the lead and maybe our recall practice. Now, the other thing, we talked about loose lead walking last week, but one of the things that I wanted to bring up was there's a connection between loose lead walking and recall, which I think is really important, and was first drawn to my attention by my training friend, Suzanne Clothier. Now, when we take our dogs out and about in the world, is the lead a safety backup, or is the lead the only thing that is keeping our dog with us? All right. Now, if you think about it, when you go out for a walk in the world, does it feel like, you're going for a connected walk together? Or does it feel like, as I say, you're hanging onto your dog's body, with as much force as you can manage? So pulling on the lead really illustrates to me that there's an over arousal and there's a loss of control before we even let the dog off the lead. So the chances of them suddenly being able to respond to a recall cue when they're loose lead walking is a bit off. I've not yet seen a dog that has perfect loose lead walking that then has a poor recall, because, as I say, those two things are quite strongly linked from my perspective. Now, better lead manners definitely result in better off-lead manners. So if you are struggling with loose lead walking, that's something that I would be focused on as well, because that's something that is potentially a bit easier to work on than recall training in the first instance. Now, one of the other important pieces of the puzzle, and we've talked a lot about focusing in on what the dog understands in terms of their reception school understanding, their primary school understanding, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that we really need to take into account is that we are the ones presenting them with the information. So it is our dog training mechanics which are important in being able to make sure that our dogs are good at the things that we're trying to teach them. Now, when I first start working with people, there's a framework of unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. All right. There's a lot of blah, 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 big words in there. But essentially what unconscious incompetence at the beginning level is not being aware that our information isn't very good. So when we are teaching our dog something, we think that we're doing a really good job, and then we're frustrated because they're not getting it. And it must be because the dog, doesn't understand. It must be because the dog is not trying hard enough. It might, whatever. So when people start working with me, I gently try and bring them into the conscious incompetence area of understanding, which is being aware that actually sometimes our information isn't great. Sometimes our information could have been better. And I love the light bulb moment that when somebody does something and they go, oh, I know why the dog didn't do that because I didn't do this. All right. That's conscious incompetence where you're aware that you didn't do it quite right. And that's a really important stage. And it's also really helpful for our relationships with our dogs because it changes the focus from just being about whether or not they're right to thinking about, actually, I'm the one, telling you what to do here. And then we move from that stage into conscious competence. So when you concentrate, you're able to give really good information, but it does take conscious thought. So it can be a little bit tiring and it may mean that you can't do it for long periods of time. And that's fine. That's understandable because in practicing that conscious competence, what's going to gradually happen over time is that you're going to move into the unconscious competence stage. So that is when, your dog does something, you just automatically respond. You don't have to think, how would Gemma deal with this? What would Gemma do? It's none of that. You just go, this is what I'm going to do. And you give the information to the dog in a timely fashion, which then means, as I say, that your relationship with your dog just grows and grows. It's just a brilliant place to be. Now, one of the things that I encourage people to think about is it's a quote that I have long enjoyed way back from when I started dog training. And that was, it's a quote, it's an anonymous source, I'm afraid, but it's a brilliant quote. And it's, don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. All right. Now, what I want my dogs to do is not just to practice so that they can do it when they're in my living room at home or in the garden at home. I want to practice that recall so thoroughly that they don't know how to get it wrong. And I actually think that that's a possibility, that my dogs don't really understand when they hear their recall cue that they shouldn't come back. I don't think it really occurs to them, all right, because they've practiced until they can't get it wrong. Now, obviously, that's the holy grail. That's where we're all working towards. But what do we do in the meantime? Because, our dog may not have the perfect recall at the moment, but we still need to get them out and about in the world, don't we? And exercise them because they're border collies and they've got lots of energy. I hear you. And I totally agree. So what we want to start thinking about is management and what we can control. All right. Now, we might want to grow to a point where our dog can have all of this lovely off-lead freedom. But in the short term, we need to think about management strategies and what we can control. So one of the things I might encourage you to do is change your pre-walk routine. So if you travel to walks by walking along a busy main road and your collie is not particularly fond of traffic, is it possible to drive rather than to walk to off-lead walking spots? So we're not building up triggers on our way to that off-lead walking spot. Can you walk at quieter times or at locations where there are less dogs and people? That's a really good way of just helping along. Your exercise requirement for your collie is being met, but it means that there's not so much pressure on that recall. One of the things that I suggest with border collies particularly is avoiding playing fields and big open spaces where they can spot things at the other side of the field because they, are doing their looking around thing. So woodlands are my preference actually for dogs. But one of the things that I would also consider if you're going to walk in woodlands where, as I say, it's normally a bit quieter and, your dog doesn't have that range of vision in quite the same way, consider when wildlife are at their most active. Because if you're going in kind of the low light, you might find that actually an open space or a playing field is actually a better choice than going to woodland, because obviously if we've got squirrels running around and we've got deer scent and things, that might be tricky. So it's just thinking about where we're walking to see whether or not we can help ourselves. So thinking about coming up with a list of, reception and primary school locations that you could walk, having a list of those things I think can be really helpful, not least because there might be days where you want to test things, but then there might be other days where, do you know what, it's been a busy day and you don't need the extra stress of trying to work out your dog's recall as well. Using a long line to prevent mistakes. Make sure that the long line is attached to a harness rather than to a head collar. I heard a very sad story of a dog that was attached by a long line to a head collar, very sadly. And I don't like to scare or upset anybody, but it actually broke its neck because it was the whiplash of somebody stepping on the long line as it was moving. It doesn't bear thinking about. So make sure that long line is always attached to a harness. And then set up some controlled training scenarios so that you can practice your recall in a way that, as I say, you can set up for success. You want to reward successful repetitions. We want that bank of that particular behavior to be nice and full up with lots and lots of reinforcement. And you're going to increase the difficulty of the challenges that you ask when you're about the 80% success rate. So when you're able to, for example, call your dog past a football that is completely still, then you might ask your friend to throw the football up and down in their arms. Then you might look to get them to kick it, etc., etc. All right. So think about getting that 80% success rate before moving on. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode gave you that extra boost to make a difference to your collie's behaviour. Today's episode was sponsored by my Border Collie training membership, Collie Culture Club. In the club, you get video training review, community Facebook group, and Facebook Live for Q&A, just like this one, as and when needed. Don't forget, you can find information about this and all the resources mentioned in the Facebook group, so head on over there now. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about how we teach our collie to relax and chill out around our home, especially when we're trying to concentrate on work calls. So stay tuned. So until next time, stay focused on progress, not perfection. And remember, every small win counts.